reason I'm here is that I wrote a book. It's called Waving Goodbye, and it is about the loss of my wife, Lisa. And I wrote it about 5 years after she died. It's now been over 6. And the reason I wrote it was because right after she died, I was searching for any kind of help, and people brought books. I looked for some books, and most of them were written by psychologists, psychiatrists, professional grief counselors, people like that, in a very academic style. And number one, I have problems reading that anyway. And my brain was in a fog after she died. I really had trouble concentrating. That also surprised me greatly. I had never experienced that before. And I now understand it's not unusual that people who go through some sort of traumatic event have that. They lose their power of concentration, a number of other things. So it was after 5 years that I had some distance, and I decided to write a book in the plainest possible language I could come up with, short chapters. And for anyone going through this, perhaps it would help. I will also say that I have received numerous emails from total strangers saying it really helped, it really resonated. Your book, it was the first book that I could identify with, and that was exactly why I wrote it. So that was very gratifying.
And you said you started at 5 years after she passed?
It was right around 5 years. I decided to look at my diary. Do both of you, do you keep diaries?
I do have a journal, but I'm not as consistent in it, but I typically write and then just post it online. That's kind of my journal.
Okay. Way back when I started working, I had a job where I was traveling so much I didn't know what city I was in. And I started to just keep track of that. So if I had to remember where I was, and it became a habit. And for most of my adult life, I have been keeping a journal. For some reason, 5 years out, I decided to look at the last 4 or 5 months of Lisa's life and what happened directly after. And I can't really explain to you why I did that. I'm guessing that it was the last time I saw her, and I wanted to just find some way to reconnect with her. And I found an email from a friend. The email really hit me, and I thought it was that important. I put the entire email into the diary. I read it again. And then I sat down, I called him up, and I said, I think it's time we sit down and talked. The story is in the book, but basically this is a friend of mine. He's been retired for a while, amazingly successful fellow, long marriage, 50 years to a lovely woman, 3 kids. But I knew that his oldest child was the daughter of his first marriage. And we were sitting having coffee. And I said, "What happened?" And he said, well, he was a young prosecutor in the DA's office in Manhattan, very challenging job, recently married about 2 years. And they had their first child, a healthy baby girl. And his wife died in childbirth, of all things, through a medical mistake. I know. It's something you think about in the 19th century. You don't even think that happens anymore, and it does. And he said that, so here was a guy dealing with a very stressful job, an infant child, and his own tremendous loss. He was able to find someone within 6 months, just by accident. They really connected, and this woman was willing to take on this grieving widow, an infant, and they have had a spectacular marriage. But he said, then after this long talk over coffee that afternoon, he said, he wrote me a long email, and the story and both emails are in the book. And he said, throughout his life, throughout the great success he's had, he thought he was depressed. And he has a psychiatrist friend, And he was explaining it to him. He said, "You're not depressed. You're sad." And he said what he tried to do was he used amnesia. He said he tried to forget about it, and you can't forget about things like that. They
No.
are there. They are big. Something happened, and it was a very big deal. I think a lot of GIs coming back from the wars in, well, I was going to say Iraq and Afghanistan, but you can go all the way back. If you pretend that nothing happened, you're going to wind up with some form of PTSD, I think. So that was the impetus for the book. And somebody asked me today how long it took to write it. And my first book, which was a book about a very controversial U.S. Air Force general, took 4 years. The other book took 4 years. This just came right out. This really came out so fast. I tweaked it, but
So this was some years after. So then you are reflecting back with hindsight. But what happens from the time that she passes, and then within those 5 years, what is your relationship with grief? Like, what did it look like in the beginning stages, and as it progressed through there? Because I'm curious to see the contrast between those early stages and those few years of grief, and then revisiting it to kind of write about it, and what it looked like when you started the book and what it looked like when you finished the book.
And before that, how did you lose your wife?
Oh, yes.
Lisa died of a rare blood cancer with a ridiculously long name, Waldenstrom's macroglobulin anemia.
Oh my God! Wow.
I know, it's a mouthful, and it is not a killer cancer. And I should also point out, she was a physician, and she was a really smart physician. And she knew as much about Waldenstrom's very quickly as the doctors who were treating her. And she said, okay, we'll treat it like a chronic illness. And in all honesty, there were people in the support group that we were involved in for Waldenstrom's that were in their 80s. They had been diagnosed, living with it for 30 years. And she said, okay, well, we're fine.
Yeah.
However, of that very tiny number that get Waldenstrom's, a tiny, tiny fraction of those people get something called amyloidosis. And that, it was described to me by one of her doctors. He said, imagine sand coursing through your bloodstream, and it will eventually wreck all of your organs, your heart, liver, kidneys, everything. And she thought she had amyloidosis just because of the way she was feeling. And she went, I was in the appointment with her doctor, and she said, I think I have amyloid. And he said, I still remember his answer. There's no way you can have amyloid. I already had my one amyloid of the year. There's no way I could have two. That was his answer. Of course, it was confirmed. What I didn't understand, what she understood immediately, was that when it was confirmed, she knew that was a death sentence. And I didn't accept it. I just thought, no, we'll figure out a way. And it just got worse and worse. And the last 2 years were pretty horrific. Most of it spent in the hospital. And I was trying to take care of Lisa in the hospital. Our daughter was graduating from high school at that time, and then about to start college. And I had a fairly demanding job. I'm not forgetting your question, CJ, because it's a good one. But yeah. I also am so grateful that I had things that a lot of people don't have. I had a really good insurance plan. This can wipe out, people financially.
Yes.
I had have a very understanding boss. He travels a lot, and I travel with him. And when Lisa got sick, he said, I want you to stop traveling with me, work remotely. And this was before COVID. So, people weren't doing it that often. So I would be working in the hospital room next to Lisa, but I was able to be with her for the last 2-3 years of her life because of, his kindness. And I will always be incredibly grateful for that. My point, getting back to the other part, was that I was able to do all these things. I think I did a fairly good job at everything. And then when she died, I couldn't concentrate.
How long was it from diagnosis to her passing?
Almost exactly 4 years. She was diagnosed in January of 2014. She died on January 1st, 2018.
Wow.
So it was pretty much 4 years. The last 2 years were very difficult. So that's the background on that. Your question, CJ, is so interesting. So can we go over that again? And then,
Yeah. So I think let's start with what did those early stages of grief look like for you? So I was in hospitals a lot with my wife. It is exhausting, but for me, the exhaustion you kind of don't even realize because you're just like, there's no choice. Like, I have to be here. We're going through this. And you just like keep going and going and going and going and going. And then all of a sudden they're gone. And for me, like, there was a certain experience that I had of that. So I'm curious, like, what that felt like in those beginning stages where you had this all consuming thing where you're there for Lisa and you're working and you also have your daughter and you're like, you have like a million plates and balls in the air and you're just like keeping them going. And then she passes. What is the next year of your life look like?
Boy, the way you describe that is so on target. I think before I go to the year after,
yeah,
I had the same experience. I was just trying to get through each day, and I didn't really think about what might happen. I couldn't think about anything else. I was just trying to get through each day. I do remember thinking, my God, this just can't get any worse. And then it would get worse. And it just kept getting worse. And then the very worst thing happened. As bad as that illness was, as bad as the hospitals were, as bad as everything was, when she died, the way I wrote about it in the book was, here I am looking at the same person that I have, adored, loved. I was connected to her like I was never connected with another human being. My mother, my father, my siblings, even my daughter. I was more connected with my wife. And all of a sudden I'm looking at her and she has moved into this other realm of great mystery that none of us know, none of us understand. And then the other moment that I talk about was I'm Jewish and we have something called the Shiva, which is 7 days of people coming to the house. And every religion, every culture has some form, some variation on this. Catholic wakes. And on the last night of the Shiva, I had, so people are just coming into the house, and I think we should talk about the Shiva later too, because I found that fascinating. I took my daughter back to college. She said it would be better for her if she was around her friends and was busy. And I said, okay. I came right back. And the moment I opened the door and walked into our home, it was a silence the likes of which I have never felt in my life. Yeah. And I just remember that time. I don't remember. I try not to go back to it because it was the worst time of my life. Nothing comes close to it. And that includes losing my mother, losing my father, losing friends. I just, once again, just tried to get through the day. I tried to keep myself busy at work. I went back to work after about a week. And I will also say, I'll admit, I did not do my best work that year at all.
Of course.
No, I didn't. And I appreciated that people, put up with that. I had no control over my emotions. I would cry on the elliptical at the gym. I would cry on the subway. I would cry at work. Sometimes I would just excuse myself and go to the bathroom and get into the stall. The year was just awful. And I spent a lot of it alone. I spent a lot of it alone. I did have two big backups. I had my wife's brother and his wife, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, who called every night and listened to me just say the same thing over and over again or cry on the phone. And one of my sisters, I have three sisters, my younger sister and I are very close. And she would call and I was able to talk with her. But I basically stayed home. And I will also say that after a year, that first year anniversary was, I noticed a change. It did get a little better. It did get a little better after that first year, but I still wasn't myself. It took 2 years after that. I mentioned in the book, I have two friends who both lost their wives in the same year. And one of them met someone, gosh, within the first month and started dating this woman and married her. And the other one, after a year, met someone, a friend introduced them, and they're married. And they were both devoted husbands. It wasn't like they were, for some reason, they were able to do that. I have not been able to do that. And I can't explain why. But the friend that I met and had coffee with that day, that was the impetus for the book, had a wonderful metaphor. He said, it was like fingerprints. Everybody's fingerprint is different, and everybody handles this differently. Then there's no right way to handle grief, and there's no wrong way. I suppose we could find wrong ways, but
yeah. I mean, there's definitely coping mechanisms, but that I would argue right. That's not handling the grief, right? That's numbing out from it. But yeah, I would agree, like our journeys are all different. There are common themes, but the journey itself and what is right for one person is not right for the next. And I think that's a beautiful analogy, the fingerprint analogy, the silence, that haunting silence. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I had the same thing. It was like the funeral was over. We did I think 10 days or maybe 2 weeks to plan it. So people were over. There was my mind was occupied with trying to figure out how to best celebrate this woman that was my everything. And I'll never forget, we finished the funeral. We had the party and the wake and everything. And my kids were at my sister's and I drove home alone, and I walked into the house and it was bright daylight, beautiful day out, yet it felt the coldest, most still, haunting darkness that I could ever imagine. And everywhere I walked through the house was just filled with this, was that the last time that she touched that? There's her hairbrush. What was she thinking when she had that? And it was everything was so silent, yet my head was so loud. And you just can't think. You can't do anything other than just be in it. And I had the same experience too. Yeah. And with work, crying.
And the other thing, CJ, is that you are in the most familiar place in the world to you. It's your home.
That's
and
right.
It is a place that was filled with life. You've got three children?
Yeah.
So there are skin knees and board games and yelling and getting dressed up for fancy dinners and just it's life. And then all of a sudden nothing. It's gone, and it is so silent. It's the contrast too that is startling.
Absolutely. That first year, it's very similar to mine, crying all the time, and I didn't know when it would hit. I'd be in Zooms at work, and it all of a sudden just comes, and I have to mute my camera. I've talked about that before. What is the thoughts that are going on in your head? So your daughter was at college, so you're literally home alone and trying to cope with something that our bodies just have a really hard time holding on to. What is the thoughts that are going through your mind that first year, getting to that anniversary date and thinking about this future, what's going on?
I could not think about a future. I could not envision a future. I think the biggest thought is that I just didn't understand this. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what happened. Yeah, of course I understood what happened. I know it was Waldenstrom's. I know she had a disease. I know people die from cancer every single day. Too many people, and or from all sorts of other things. So I'm not naive in that regard. But what I wrote in the book was and this is almost arrogance on my part or naivete, but I just didn't. I knew bad things happened. I read about them every day in the paper. I just didn't. They wouldn't happen to me, not me. I was immune to this. I read about other people, and guess what?
Yeah.
I'm not any different.
Yeah, absolutely. It is hard to comprehend because it's something we experience every day or a lot in our life. Of you read something and it's like, oh, that's really sad, or oh, that's and you have sympathy for it, but it's not until it hits you that you're like, oh, okay, and you switch from sympathy to empathy, and
yes.
and life takes on a new character. The idea of not being able to envision a future, that was similar for me. Like, and I think like it needs to be stressed that when we say you can't envision a future, like you literally can't. There's no, like for me, I couldn't even like conjure up a picture in my mind. There was no ability to attach feelings to it. There's no ability to understand it. There's no ability to plan or think of anything. It was almost like it just didn't exist. It was a void. And all I had was this present moment to either keep going or not. And that just became the choice every day, every moment. Do I keep going or don't I? Do I go like lay in bed and do nothing with my life? Or do I get out of bed and brush my teeth and shower and try to feel human? And
early on, some people suggested getting into a grief group. And what I found the most interesting was before I got into the grief group, I called and the social worker that was running it said she had to do an intake. I said, what's that? She said she had some questions to ask. So I said, fine. And she said, I'm trying to remember them now. She said, do you find yourself walking into a room and forgetting why you walked in? I said, like, all day long. And she said, any trouble? Yeah. Any trouble sleeping? I said, yeah. And she said, what? And I said, I don't sleep.
Exactly.
And oddly, I wake up like an alarm goes off at 4:30 every morning. That's when she died. And there were, she said, any changes in weight? I said, yeah. She said, up or down? I said, well, I've lost 10 pounds. I would eventually lose 25 pounds.
Wow.
And that was, I looked, I had the same weight that I had in high school. And people would say, wow, you look great. And I said, grief diet, you don't want to try it. And then her last question was, she said, do you have any suicidal thoughts? And I said, in my entire life, I have never had a suicidal thought. Plus, I am now a single parent and I feel very responsible for my daughter. And I said, however, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow and there was a chance I could see my wife again, well, that would be just fine. That would be fine with me.
Yep.
And she said, well, that's a passive suicide thought, not an active. So that's fine. You're okay. I didn't know the difference there.
See, and that fascinates me though, because I think it is a common experience. Like, it's hard to describe to people. It's not that we want to die. It's we want to see them again. There's a difference. There's not, I'm escaping this pain. It's, I want to see them. I miss them. I need to be with them, which is a common refrain that I've heard over and over. And I had it, and it crops up where it's just like, I just want to see you. And I've also had suicidal ideations in my depression. And so I know the difference. So I think like we're limited in our communication of like, well, are you having suicidal thoughts? I'm like, well, technically I'm thinking about being dead, but I'm not necessarily like thinking about killing myself, and exactly. And my kids have it too. And, and you could see that some people get afraid of it. And I was like, what? There's nothing to be afraid of. They're not saying they want to go do something harmful to themselves. They miss their fucking mom. Yeah. Like what do you expect them to not have thoughts like that? But anyways, so you get through that first year. You said it started it changed a little bit in the second year. What is that now? It eased up.
It eased up in the first year. But I was still, the second year was still rough. But after the second year, it was a little bit better. And after the third year, it was better. And it kept getting a little bit better. And then one day, and it was around the 5-year mark, I was walking down, I still remember this, Madison Avenue. I live in New York City. And it was one of those absolutely gorgeous October days, a perfect fall day. And I'm walking down Madison Avenue and I saw people smiling. And you don't see that in New York too often anymore. And people seemed happy. And I had my AirPods in and I had the most gorgeous piece of music on. And I suddenly realized something. I realized I was happy. And it wasn't like I got a raise or I won the lottery or something. I was just walking down the street on a gorgeous day and I was glad to be alive and I was happy and I didn't think I would ever feel that again. And that told me, and I never thought I would feel that in that first year ever again. I think that was another reason I wrote the book. I wanted to tell people in the beginning, you're not going to believe this. I wouldn't have believed it myself if someone had told me what I just said. But it will happen. It will eventually happen, I think.
So when you say things got a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better, would you be able to define better for us and then be able to reflect on what did you do? Like, what was it that started to make things be better?
I was crying less. It still will crop up, and it crops up when you least expect it, or sometimes you don't know. I mean, sometimes it's obvious. I tend to cry there's some music that makes me cry, and oddly, kindness, people's kindness, it makes me emotional. But now, when the crying comes, it's more like a sneeze. You can feel it coming on. I can feel it coming on, and the duration is about as long. It's like, and then I move on. And it doesn't happen as often. So that's one change. And I still, a lot of people commented that there were a lot of funny things in the book. There were a lot of funny stories. And that is because it's part of life. For me, humor is important. And some funny, wacky things happened in those 5 years, and I put them in the book. And I think laughing really helps. It helps me anyway.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about a comedian or a funny movie, or it just just the whacked out things that happen. I'll tell you a couple if you want to hear them that are in the book.
Yeah. We love humor here.
I'm not watch now that it'll fall flat, but this actually happened when Lisa was sick, and near the end, I put her in a hospital room that was a private room where you had to pay extra for it, and they had a really weird billing system where you had to pay every day. They didn't just give you the bill when she was discharged or whatever. And I would be with her until late at night. The business office was open 24 hours. So I would go down and I got to know the people there. And, I would give them my credit card. They would say, "How's your wife doing?" I said, "She's coming along." And then I would go home. One day my boss said, "Would it be possible for you to come for a meeting? I'd like you to be in it." And I said, "Sure, I can come down." So I left earlier, and there was a different guy behind the desk when I left to pay before I left. And he hands me these 3 forms, and he says, "You sign all 3 forms." And I said, "Well, I never had to sign forms before. Is this new?" And he says, "No, we always do it this way. We will not release the body unless you sign all 3 forms." And I looked at him and I said, "My wife has cancer. She's not doing that well, but I just left her 2 minutes ago, and I'm pretty sure she was still breathing." And the guy looked ashen, and he said, "I am so sorry. It's just that the only people that come in here with suits and ties on are undertakers."
Oh my gosh. No.
I thanked him. I said, "That's the first laugh I've had in weeks. Thank you so much." So
That's amazing.
there was that, and then the other thing that I put in the book. This is just a lovely story. I think it's not exactly a funny one, but about a year and a half after she died, Claire and I, my daughter's Claire, were in San Francisco for a wedding of one of her favorite cousins, and I had to be from there. I had to be in Israel for work, and she had to go to a school program in England. So I said, well, why don't you come to Israel with me? When I'm done, we can travel for a couple of days, and then you go off to England and I'll come back home. So she came with me, and a friend of mine said, he wanted me to meet someone. And I said, I'm not ready. I'm not ready for this. And he said, she's a friend, she could be a friend. So I said, I'm with my daughter. He said, so bring her along. I love the Israeli practicality. And so we on the last night we met this woman and we had dinner with her, and we got to see a different part of Tel Aviv, and it was a fine evening. It was pleasant, and then Claire and I decided to walk back to the hotel afterwards. So we're walking back, and Claire just says, "May I make an observation?" I said, "Okay, what's your observation?" She said, "Well, first of all, you weren't interested in her," which was absolutely true. And then she said, however, someday you will meet someone that is going to interest you. And when that happens, you shouldn't mention mommy 10 times in the conversation. It makes them feel insecure. And I thought, I am getting dating advice from someone I once diapered. This shows how my world has just completely turned upside down. So,
oh, wow. That's amazing.
Did you appreciate having that kind of almost like a blessing, it seems, from your daughter to date again?
She has tried to encourage me. She has been so wonderful about that. And I know that it can go in the other direction too. It's a very good point, Ashley. I have friends that have been dating and they're getting a lot of pushback from their children. And in fact, one of those fellows I mentioned, a friend who lost his wife and then remarried, his kids were not very happy about that. So I feel I feel just, well, one of the things I said at the end of the book was what has helped is the gratitude that I feel, and the gratitude of, first of all, just having Lisa in my life, having this. I had a great marriage. A lot of people don't have great marriages. I have a child. A lot of people would love to have children and can't have children. I have a job that I find very satisfying and I'm good at, and that gives me tremendous satisfaction. So, and I've got a roof over my head, and my grandparents were immigrants. They went through the Depression. My parents went through the Depression. My dad went through World War II. I'm grateful to have hot water in the morning. I'm just, so if I can put the gratitude over the loss, that most days it works. Not every day. It doesn't work every day, but most days it does.
Do you feel like the gratitude was kind of the defining thing that helped things to become better and better? Like, did your gratitude practice and ability to feel gratitude increase in proportion to things, the crying being less and all of that, and moving closer towards that moment where you were walking down Madison Avenue?
I think you're right. I think it was. And I think I didn't feel that in the beginning. I was just still in shock. I was still stunned. And it wasn't until I could start putting my life together and figuring out how I got to where I am and all the little incremental steps that all of us take that, brings us to where we are. And I think, I didn't realize it until later. And the gratitude is a very big part of my life now. I may have talked about this when I spoke to you earlier, but I had a friend, a fabulous person who we shared the same birthday, and she was exactly 30 years older than me. And she was a former nun, and she was an educator. She was the head of a large Catholic school. And right after Lisa died, a mutual friend had a small birthday dinner for us. So Elizabeth was turning 96 and I was turning 66. And so someone said to Elizabeth, "So, Elizabeth, what have you learned in your 96 years?" And without missing a beat, she said, "When you help others, you feel better about yourself." And I thought, wow, yeah, that has always stayed with me. And just, getting those emails from people saying, this has really helped, this book helped, that it makes you feel good. I will also point out, someone said, "So Warren, what have you learned in your 66 years?" And I said, "I learned what a good marriage is." I was lucky enough to learn that. So
yeah. What does your grief mean to you?
I'm not sure I understand the question. What do you mean?
When you think about it, when you reflect on it, it's obviously had an impact on your life, and it's spurred you to write a book about it, to share, to kind of transmute that pain into something else. And you're 6 years out now. You've had this hindsight. You've written this book. What is your grief to you now at this moment in your life? Like, what is it in your life? How do you look at it? How do you reflect on it? What is the emotion that surrounds it? Is there, like, some people could move towards anger, some can move toward, it sounds like you've moved towards gratitude. Is it a defining characteristic in your life? Is it part of your identity? Like, what is grief to you, your grief to you specifically with Lisa?
The silence you hear is me thinking. And that is such an interesting question. I think it is one of the most profound parts of my life. It is something I never expected to have. And as I said, I lost my parents, but that seemed to be the natural way of things. I saw my grandparents go, and then my parents went, and, people get older and they die. This was different. This was so different. And I think the grief, in some ways, it has defined me. I wish it didn't, but I think it does. I will also tell you that there was anger in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I can look back at that first year, and I am lucky I wasn't arrested, just getting into a fight with someone on the street over nothing, over nothing. And I just wasn't thinking right. And the anger has, thank God, has subsided, and the gratitude has taken over. But it was a process, and it is a continuing process. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be with me, and I'm going to be working on this for the rest of my life. It's going to, so it's a part of me. How is it with you? I mean, is it still a part of you too?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the idea of grief staying with us for our whole life is true. I think it's always there, and it's our ability to grow around it and to hold it that changes as we heal. Right. So I think the notion that we heal grief is not that we have this thing and we apply healing to it and it goes away. The healing is we can contain it within our vessel, within our body, and we can have a changed relationship to it, but it will always be with us. But I have noticed that there are seasons in my life, and I'm about 3.5 years out now, where it was my identity. And I had to kind of sit back at one point and be like, is this what I want to be defined as? Do I want to be defined as like my life is consumed with grief and it's all my identity is? Or will there be a point in my life when the relationship to that grief changes in a way that it's now my story, not my identity? And it's a part of who I am, and the story becomes what I did with it. And now there's a new life that has been created post lost. And I think it can feel subtle sometimes, where it's our story versus our identity. I think I fall back into it being my identity in my low points. So when I'm really, really struggling, the grief becomes my identity again. And all I want to do is, honestly, is just to be held. And I want somebody to just like make me feel okay and to rescue me from it. And that usually, the way that plays out is it's just me like crying out to my wife and being like, where the fuck are you? Like, I can't do this. And like, now I'm right back in it. Like it was day one, begging for her to just come back and like help me. Like, I don't want to keep moving forward. It is exhausting to have to heal and to carry it. And I'm like, can we just go back? Like, even if you have to have cancer for the rest of your life and we just do this dance every 3 months, like, I just want you back. I just want something back that feels like I'm not alone, you know? So that's why I ask, because I think it's a subtle shift. And so I think we go back and forth, but I think that back and forth increases the more that we're able to hold it and heal.
Can I read you something here?
Absolutely.
It resonated here. So I have a friend, Howard, and Howard he's actually one of the leading researchers in Alzheimer's, but more pertinent is that he lost his wife about 6 years before Lisa died, and I wrote him a medical question, and I said, "How long does it physically hurt?" And he wrote me this email, and then I sent this email out to friends who had lost a partner, and I found this, but it kind of goes along with what you're saying. He wrote back, "It becomes an emotional and psychological scar. The acute pain of grief and loss turns into a recognition of the magnitude of how life has changed so dramatically. There are many changes with regard to family and friends, perhaps loneliness and a loss of self, a loss of who we are. One has to eventually recreate one's life and a new self. I probably still think of Janet every day. My new life is not what I imagined or even could have imagined in any way, nor is my new self, although there are remnants deep down inside that haven't changed and have helped me through it all. Work certainly helps. Eventually, life goes on. It's taken me more than 5 years to really get my emotional bearings back, which really surprised me. Functionally, I was able to adjust sooner. I hope you will find some solace and peace and happiness. The wound heals. Let's have lunch, Howard." And
Wow.
and I didn't even understand it when I first got it, because that was just weeks after Lisa died. I now have a better understanding it, but I think he is so correct that we are new. We have to recreate ourselves.
Yes, we do.
And one of the other things I mentioned, I don't know if this happened to you, but all of a sudden I realized early on that I was going to be seen in the world on my own as myself. And I didn't have this amazing, gorgeous, luminous human being next to me, whether it was on an airplane or walking down the street or walking into a party. And I had this extraordinary woman with me that made me feel better and made me feel like a bigger person. And all of a sudden I thought, oh, fuck me. The world's going to just see me on my own now.
Yep.
And I'm going back to that individual self again. And I had to, that was a tough one for me.
I had the exact same thing. I actually talked to my wife about it before she died. And I was like, our friends will abandon me. I'm like, they're only here for you. And I was like, you're the better of the two of us. You are what makes us so incredible. And it was so hard to go from Ariana and CJ to CJ.
Yeah. Oh,
because
wow,
of that, and it was like, one, it's that self dies. And like you said, I love that. It's like you're recreating your new self, but you're recreating your new self without this person beside you that you were like, you make me better. You make me who I am. You're the thing that lights me up. And, whether that's right or wrong, that was just the reality.
And there's the real, you were thinking, well, this is just going to go on forever. I mean, she's here with me. And one of the things I talked about was in the wedding ceremony, in that, and at the end of the book, I also wrote, I never realized this, but it's a love story as well. And just as religion is, intertwined with death, so is love. And in the marriage ceremony, that ultimate moment in your life when you are in front of the entire community saying, yeah, I am going to commit myself to this person. And you hear, in sickness and in health, and it seems pro forma. And I said, it's like getting the when you get a washing machine, you get a manual with it, and you just think, yeah, well, whatever, you say yes, and you think at that penultimate moment, how can you even think about something like that? No, it's going to go on forever. This is just the way it's always meant to be, and this is cool. And guess what? There's a reason they say that.
Yeah. Until death do us part. And that's like the big joke I always say is like, my wife couldn't stand it anymore that she had to die.
They've changed it. They've changed it now.
What is it now?
I think it's kind of references like "and even after death." I'm going to look it up now because I know that's changed, and I mean I'm getting married next year, and so I was thinking about
congratulations, that's wonderful.
Thank you. I was thinking about that phrase because I was like, I don't like that. It's like, no, man. If I die first, like,
that's right.
You better still fucking love me.
Oh, that was one of the other comments. Lisa didn't really talk about her death. She really couldn't talk about it. It was too difficult for her. But we would be sitting in the hospital room, and she would sometimes just say things and, come out and I would just, and she once said, it is said that if you've had a good marriage, it'll be easier to move on to another relationship. And I knew exactly what she was saying. She was giving me permission.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was the one that didn't want to hear that. And I said, I don't want to discuss this. And then I realized, wow, that was the wrong thing to say. She was being so incredibly gracious.
Mm-hmm.
So I turned it around and I said, okay, if something happens to me, do I want you going into a convent? I said, I guess not.
Yes.
Although I probably did.
I did. I do.
I do.
Yeah.
But I said, no, that wouldn't be right. But I wouldn't want you to have sex with anyone in the boathouse out at the lake in Wisconsin.
Exactly.
That is my turf. And you even try that, I'm going to throw lightning bolts at both of you. So don't try it.
That's
but
awesome.
I got her to laugh a little bit, and that made me feel better.
That's awesome. So let's take this now back to that first question. So we've heard a little bit kind of about this process, and it seems like gratitude has been a really, really big kind of cornerstone for you in your grief and developing that practice. So you write the book, which causes you to reflect on these stories, to put pen to paper. How has your grief, or has it changed since writing the book and your relationship to it and to Lisa since writing the book?
Okay. A couple of things happened. First of all, I thought writing the book was cathartic. I thought it helped. It has helped me, as I mentioned earlier, getting the responses from people saying, the book has helped. And that, going back to my friend Elizabeth McCormick, that made me feel better. However, I will also say that I was feeling better, moving on. And then I've been doing podcasts and interviews for the book, and it brought it all back. And I found the last month to be actually more difficult than I expected. I should have seen it coming. It makes complete sense, but it's been harder, actually. I'm talking with both of you. I'm enjoying this conversation, but I think, it dredges it all back up again. Yeah. It really does. So that's been a change. I have a question I wanted to ask you, and I just remembered it. Have you dreamt of your wife? Do you have dreams?
Yeah. In the beginning, I had just a few, but nothing as beautiful and as amazing as some of our other guests have had, which has always pissed me off. Yeah. Because they're just like, they're not.
Comparison is the thief of joy, CJ.
Yes, I know, but like these are not dreams that she's like visiting me. This is like my subconscious tormenting me about everything.
If it makes you feel better, my mom's been dead 22 years and I've only gotten like 2. So
yeah. So maybe it's an infantile thing that we're just cursed to not have dreams.
I feel like I've only gotten 1 that I like still remember to this day. So there's definitely been like, just kind of like, oh, I think she was in it last night. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I think she was at that party in my dream last night or something, but nothing like the one that I've had. So you've got 15 more years and then you can complain. Okay.
Okay. Feedback taken.
Have you had dreams, Warren?
0. And I don't understand it. I do not understand it. I've talked to Claire about this. Claire has had dreams, and she said, you're lucky. The dream she has is that Lisa is dying again, or she's sick. And I said, frankly, I wouldn't. I'd take a dream like that. Yeah, I would.
Yeah,
I'd try, and I don't understand it. I don't get it. As me, someday maybe.
Well, apparently, according to Ashley, we have 15 more years at least before we can worry about that.
She's left you signs in different ways, which I know you've seen a bunch of signs, right?
I have. Once I allowed myself to be okay with saying that something is a sign, I have started to see them.
I feel like any excuse for a sign is just like, I'm just like, whatever. There's a cardinal outside. I'm like, that's them.
But it took me a while, right? Like I had to get over it. I get it. Yeah. So where I was like, oh, it's not harmful to believe it, regardless if it's true or not. Who cares? If it's bringing me peace and joy, then I should allow myself to feel that. But now I'm just like, well, what does that mean? Because I have something going on in my life. Is that a yes or a no? So like now I just like, I overcomplicate everything.
I think that might have been one of the joys. I don't know if that's the right word. That's not the right word, but one of the simplicities, I guess, of like losing your parent as a child is like your parent, like my dad and my like mom, grandmas and aunts and uncles, like reinforce that, or like, they were beautiful. Like, oh, there's there's this, or her best friend told me like every time she sees a butterfly, she knows it's a sign. And like literally like the next afternoon after that, her friend told me that like there was a butterfly that like landed on like the beach chair I was sitting on. And I was just like, like that's a little bit too. Yeah. So I think that like that being something that friends of hers and family members have always like instilled in me in a way, it was never even a thing of like, is it actually a sign,
Yeah.
Versus when like if I had lost her older, I'd probably be a bit more skeptical.
How old were you?
I was 9.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I think it was more of that. It was this like the kind of youngness of it. You're like, we used to like write on balloons and send them off. It's like, I gave up doing that after like 16 when I was like, these aren't going to heaven. like traded in.
The cynical 16-year-old.
Yeah.
I get that.
Ashley, I've never asked you this, but the thought just occurred to me. So Warren, for you to know, so her mom, my aunt, died exactly the same way, roughly the same age as my wife, just 20 years prior. Ashley was there with my kids and helping me through this. Did that like trigger at all anything for you from losing Aunt Nancy while you were watching Ariana and watching my kids go through that?
I mean, yeah, it was like the same exact thing. But it didn't like trigger anything in a bad way. It just took me back in a way that was like, yeah, this is the same. Like this, it was at home in her bed. And, like this time I like went in the room and witnessed it. When my mom was dying, I did not go in her bedroom. I was just like way too afraid, which I woke up on the day that, I woke up on the day that she had passed. And I'm pretty sure it was definitely like my dad was crying. So I knew that, she wasn't doing well. And I don't regret not going in there. Like at that age, like it was not something I wanted to see or like be a part of. So like in this case, I kind of was like, well, this was an opportunity. I mean, this sounds like fucking morbid, but it's like, this was me like experiencing it,
Right.
But yeah, the only thing that has ever been like super triggering for me, and it wasn't really in a bad way, but I had a friend that gave me this like little flower pot for my desk at work, or he just gave it to me for like my birthday or something. And the flowers smelled like the fucking funeral home.
Really?
Like, I swear to God, it took me back to the funeral home. I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm so sorry. I have to throw these out. I'm so sorry. Like, I was just like, these are terrible. So there are certain like smells that actually do take me back, as like that definitely takes me back to that day. And probably more like that whole week, like the whole week. So I definitely stay away from like, I can like smell them. I can like envision them. And I love flowers. I love getting flowers. And that is like the one thing I'm like, no.
Yeah, that's wild.
But yeah, I don't think it didn't really, there was nothing triggering in like a bad way. It was more just like, oh wow, like this is like history. It felt like history, like repeating itself almost.
Mm-hmm. How could it not? How could it not?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was seriously almost the same exact setup. It was like the same exact setup, and the house was like a little bit different, but like the bedroom, like being so big and open, like that was like my parents' bedroom as well, and it almost felt like I was like watching like 20 years ago happen again. And so, I guess, yes, in a way that means it was triggering.
I mean, your dad was literally there helping administering medicine to Ariana too.
Yeah.
So I couldn't do it. Yeah.
I think, I mean, I would find that very difficult. It's like, that's not an easy thing to do. I think like, yeah, I mean, it wasn't triggering in a bad way. That's all I can say. I mean, like, it certainly takes you back, like I've said.
So both your mom, Ashley, and your wife, CJ, died at home?
Yes. Yeah, we did hospice at home.
Yeah.
So I had a choice. I was given a choice and I write about this in the book. On December 15th, the palliative care doctor and the social worker came to me. We were talking outside of Lisa's room. They said there was nothing more they could do. And I still remember the phrase. It was the most benign way you could talk about an impending death. It was, we're now at the stage where the only option is to make her as comfortable as possible.
Yeah.
And the two options were, we could go to a hospice hospital in the Bronx called Calvary, or I could bring her home. And I knew what I was going to do immediately, although I did go to Calvary and look at it, and it was the people couldn't have been nicer. But I brought her home, and I made some mistakes. That was one of the smartest things I did. And to have her in our home, the home that we shared, the home that we were a family, it meant a lot. And it meant a lot for that she died in our bed that we shared. And that I was there when I could help put her on the gurney, and rather than and also we had enough of hospitals I had enough. So yeah, I'm glad I did it that way. I know some people would not feel that comfortable having death.
Yeah, so close to home.
Close, yeah, so close, literally. And at the same time, I think this is exactly how human beings dealt with this for a time immemorial. And it's only in the last century that we became, people there were no hospitals, and, people, now we've sanitized death and we've removed it. My father told me the story that when he was in college in the 1930s, I remember the story, his grandfather died, and he was very close with his grandfather. He came back from college for the funeral, and he said the funeral was in the house. And he told me the story when I was about 9 or 10. I was horrified. I said, "You had a dead body in the house? How could you know?" And he just, shrugged his shoulders and said, "Yeah, that's what they did then."
Yeah.
And,
I think I actually go back and forth on if I would want to die at home or not. And I know for like a fact that I do not want to have like any sort of like 5-day people come and watch and like, no. If I have a terminal illness and I know that like I'm going to die, I would probably move to an area where medically assisted death is allowed. Because like I like just that sheer amount of attention when I'm like dying is mortifying to me. Then again, I'm fucking dying, so I guess who cares? if that brings peace to the others around me. But I don't know if it's because I experienced it at such a young age that I'm like, I just don't like, and that's just like something that like has like I literally I've always had this like, God no, absolutely not, way too much attention on me. And I would rather, I don't mind it being at home, but I would want it to be like one day, like come say your goodbyes. And, you know, I'm not like, you know, slowly declining. But I think that like there is, especially Warren, when you're like, you guys were in the hospital for so long, and I can't like necessarily remember all the days that they were in the hospital and not, but I know that there was like lots of doctor's appointments, lots of in and outs, and this like infamous hospital bed that was brought into our house that she lived in her final days. And I understand like the importance and like why it's probably significantly more like comfortable and comforting for everyone to have the person at home versus like in a hospital. We did have a guest, two or three guests that they chose hospice, and they had a really, really good experience, which I think is also really like nice and encouraging, especially because you had such a crappy experience with your nurses, CJ.
I did. Yeah. Yeah. We had a pretty horrific experience. But my dad passed. He was in hospice hospital or whatever they call it. But yeah, I think I do think it's a very personal choice. I am very, very happy that we did it this way. I think it was such a beautiful thing to have the contrast of this horrific thing happening, but my family and friends being downstairs and hearing them. And Ashley's dad was, you know, doing his thing and causing a ruckus and spilling garbage everywhere because he's like the guy that you can count on to spill something or break something.
Literally.
So we're laughing at him. So it's like you just have these moments of reprieve and the ability to just like, my kids got to sleep in bed with my wife while she was dying. And it was like the thoughts were never, oh, there's death in my house. It's more of we are experiencing this together in an environment that is not sterile, but in an environment that is us and uniquely us and for my kids. So I personally was very happy that we did it that way as well. So for the sake of time here, I do want to ask, we do ask if you would be willing to share a memory, one of your favorite memories with Lisa and you guys.
I want to share two memories because when we were talking about dying at home, I wanted to share this with you. And then I want to tell you another story that is might be a lot happier. And right near the end, she was spending more and more time in bed, and she wanted to come to the kitchen counter, and I had to help her walk over there. And she sat down and was just kind of taking it in. And she hadn't eaten anything for a couple of days by then. And I had this great idea. And my closest friend had sent us a gift, which was 10 pints of ice cream from our favorite ice cream place in Wisconsin. And
Yum.
And I took out the mint chocolate chip, which was Lisa's favorite, and I put it in a teaspoon, and I put it in her mouth, and she ate it. And then she motioned for another one. So I gave her another one, and then she motioned one more time. and those 3 spoonfuls of mint chocolate chip were the last thing she ever ate. And
amazing.
That made me feel good.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That is so awesome.
That was a good thing. Now, here's my favorite story of all time. So I'm this lonely single guy in Manhattan, and I am trying to meet someone, and I am failing at every turn. If there's the slightest interest, they're not interested in me, or vice versa. And all my friends have been married, and I cannot figure out this equation. And I'm just feeling like the world's biggest loser. And then a friend asked me the world's most mundane question: do you want to meet someone? And I'm thinking, oh God, another wasted evening. And I said, sure, fine, whatever. And they invite me for dinner, and they invite Lisa. And I was even thinking of canceling. It was a lousy night. The weather was awful, and I was tired, and I think I just didn't have any reserve left at all. But they went to the bother, so I didn't want to, say no. So I go over there. I got in there first. I got to their apartment first, and in walks Lisa. And I often said it took me 15 seconds. It didn't take me that long at all. And throughout the evening, I tried not to stare at her eyes because they were the most gorgeous blue eyes I've ever seen. And I didn't want her to think, so it was a really interesting conversation. I remember some of the things we talked about. And then all of a sudden we realized it's like it's close to midnight and it's a work night. And we got up and we thanked them. And then we went out into the hallway to wait for the elevator, and we didn't have the other couple to back us up anymore. And there was that awkward moment, you're just kind of looking at each other. And to break that awkwardness, I just said, well, that went rather well. Do you want to get married? And she looked at me like I was nuts. And later she said, when she got into the cab, she said she thought I seemed okay, but then when I said that, she thought I was crazy. But then in the days afterwards, in the days that followed, when she related this story to her friends, they said, well, it sounds like this guy's got a sense of humor. Maybe you ought to give him a second chance. And to my great fortune, she did give me a second chance. But here's my question, because I've thought about this. And over the years, we would laugh about the story, and I would tell the story different times. I had never said that to anyone after meeting them 3 hours before. Wow. Never. I mean, what was that all about? I can't, to this day, I cannot explain it. So a year after, I remember it was St. Patrick's Day that we met. It was March 17th. And the following March 17th, we were already married. Claire was on her way. Yeah. And everything had come together for us in the most beautiful, fabulous way. So, I go back to the gratitude thing. Look what I got, look what I got. And you should go to I'm sorry, I'm going to say this. I have a website, warrenkozak.com. You can see pictures of Lisa and you can see what I got. I mean, I still can't believe this gorgeous woman was interested in me, but
that's amazing. And
go figure those things.
And what is the book too? We've been talking about it, but what is the book and how can people find it?
The book is called Waving Goodbye, and it's Amazon or wherever you buy books. Yeah, Waving Goodbye.
Well, we are grateful for you to come on and sharing Lisa with us and kind of sharing your story, your process, and kind of exposing more of what grief is actually like. And so we are grateful that you were willing to come on. So thank you so much.
Ashley and CJ, I am the grateful one for not just being invited to come on, but everything you two are doing. It is just fabulous. Thank you both.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Day After. You can find this podcast and more at our website at www.thedayafter.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate if you could take a moment to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts.